Been a bit. Sorry about that. So this video is kind of a follow-up to my last one. Haven't watched it, you don't have to. If you're familiar with the 6th and 7th episode of the Bungo Stray Dogs anime, you're up to speed. In that video, I noted that many of the arc's faults came from this book, its progenitor, and that statement is twofold. The first part is that it isn't an anime or even manga original arc, and therefore had some issues getting adapted, on top of having to make some changes to fit the timeline of the anime. And the second part is that this is the first Bungo Stray Dogs light novel, and Asagiri's first attempt at writing a story thread this long, as the manga up until this point was only now entering the guild arc. If you're familiar with the anime version, you might be thinking, what does she mean this long? The arc is only 2 episodes long, and first of all, thinking isn't allowed while watching me. Second of all, so about half of this book was cut out for the sake of the anime, so let's have a quick rundown for those that are new. The book opens on an exclusive scene of Kuneko and Dazai chasing some thief. The scene is largely irrelevant, it mostly serves to introduce new readers to Dazai and Kuneko, as well as to set up Dazai getting his copy of The Complete Suicide. This novel is intended to also be readable by people that had not read the manga, so it does cover some story threads that the reader might already be familiar with, but that's fine. We get a scene where Dazai eats a psychedelic, and then we get introduced to the first novel unique story thread, Dazai's titular entrance exam. So Dazai showed up at the Armed Detective Agency 4 days ago after being recommended directly by Chief Taneda and had no history to be found on him. Kuneko is to perform his entrance exam by having him assist with the serial tourist kidnappings case. And from here on, until they capture the taxi driver, things are about the same as the anime. Get a tip to visit the hospital, rescue Sasaki, 4 people die, the dirt gets out, they find the taxi driver out, they get attacked by Akutagawa, and finally they get a tip about the bomb at the port. And from here on though, almost nothing is the same as in the anime. In a cafe, notably not the cafe, Dazai and Kuneko come to the conclusion that the bomber is a foreign terrorist. Get information on him, they make a scene at the American embassy before conspiring with an attaché and an American intelligence operative to figure out the bomber in question is Zadkiel Alamta, a Japanese man that has worked as a bomb purveyor for a Middle Eastern terrorist organization because we know no other place on Earth has terrorist bombs. Once Rampa figures out where the bomb is, they quickly disarm it, before finding Alamta's body and getting told that the taxi driver is dead, both being found with zeros covering their entire bodies. At the same time, Rokuzo calls Kuneko to tell him that the emails they've been getting from the Azure Messenger were sent from Dazai's laptop, a detail we were kind of keyed into with an interlude scene of Dazai ominously typing on his laptop. Kuneko then takes Dazai to a remote location and pretends to kill him, where we find out that Dazai was framed and knew it all along, and that he also had a bug planted on him that Kuneko destroyed him pretending to kill him. They then get told that due to planted interference device, an aircraft is gonna fall directly onto Yokohama if they don't stop it, something Asagiri never dared write again. Kuneko and Dazai follow a tracking device that Dazai set up into an abandoned military base, where they have the same fight scene as in the anime, except instead of the key stopping the bomb, it's stopping the interference device. The plane narrowly doesn't hit the ground, Kuneko yells into the sky in a scene I wish was animated, and then we get a fake out ending, because at this point we are led to believe that the 2 people that Kuneko and Dazai just defeated were the ones fronting as the Azure Apostle. We get a graveyard scene with Kuneko and Sasaki, and Dazai calls Kuneko over to the abandoned hospital, Rokuzo and Sasaki kill each other. Cue the actual ending. I'm sweating up a storm, I should have recorded this in the colder months. So this plot is about 5 times better than what we got in the anime. Though it has one more fake out depth of the timeline, putting our count up to 50 plus 1, it does still make the whole case look like a lot more of a challenge for the detective agency. The fact that Dazai and Kuneko do not have years of experience working together, Rokuzo being fooled into thinking Dazai was the enemy, the moment that Alamta and the taxi driver's bodies are both found, the additional challenge of making it seem like Dazai and Kuneko are expected to stop a flying aircraft, it all just feels much more complicated than the simple 1, 2, 3 of the anime. Of course, this is also assisted by the fact that the 180-page novel is a bit longer than the 2 anime episodes, leaving more room for us to see how Kuneko is struggling with the case. Notice how I only say Kuneko because Dazai did not struggle for a second, but I still feel like my general opinion of the plot is largely positive, though that might just be because So this might seem weird, but in my opinion, the bigger difference maker between the Azure Messenger arc and Dazai's entrance exam isn't in how the plots are different, but in the smaller details that were cut out of the anime. In the abandoned hospital scene, the victims are in an iron bar cage instead of a glass one, meaning that the released gas could have been deadly to Kunekida and Dazai. Alongside Dazai, Sasaki is the one pulling Kunekida back from the poisonous gas instead of Atsushi, which is an important detail because later in the book it shows us that despite having a resentment to Kunekida for outing the Azure King, she still doesn't want him to die. Dazai holding on to Rampo's hair happens in this too, as a way for Dazai to find out Rampo isn't actually gifted, which leads to an actually neat exchange between Dazai and Kunekida where Dazai is genuinely surprised at Rampo's skills. Akutagawa is actually written to be fierce, with Kunekida sustaining multiple injuries in the fight, and his internal dialogue of how terrified he is to fight him, doing a much better job of showing how much of a threat he is in a single attack that he lands in the show. And after this fight, he doesn't say something completely out of character, worthy of standing next to Dazai. My ass, he hasn't even given you a day's worth of attachment issues. By far the most influential details, the ones that make the whole thesis of the arc, the idea that Kunekida, if driven too far by his ideals, might go down the same road as the Azure King, actually make sense. The whole book does a lot to make Kunekida seem dangerous. There are three main parts to it: statement to Rokuzo, the gun, and the Azure King's escalation. The first part is fairly quick at least. While talking to Rokuzo, he says the ends justify the means, while referring to using a virus to track down the source of the email. But the context itself is not quite alarming, as Kunekida is only referring to breaking the law instead of actually hurting anyone. It is a line that's given quite a bit of attention, as Rokuzo is genuinely surprised that Kunekida would ever say something like that. Despite being very small, it's one of the more concrete examples of Kunekida saying something alike to the Azure King. The second part is way more interesting to analyze. So in my last video, I said that I knew I would have a lot to say. And that is because just on the 18th page, the most interesting part of the book, at least from my perspective of someone that's coming from the anime, happens. While introducing Kunekida to the assignment of examining Dazai, the president voices his concern about him. He has no history, a worryingly unique gift, and was recommended directly by Chief Taneda. He has the potential to be very dangerous. So he tells Kunekida, if you sense any wickedness in his heart, shoot him and hands him a gun. Kunekida accepts the gun. This does more as a symbol than any words that Kunekida would say. Kunekida knows what a gun is, we know what a gun is. It is a tool used exclusively for killing, something Kunekida is directly opposed to. But he accepts it because, well, he is willing to go against his ideals to rid the world of evil. At least that's what he believes at this point in the book. Still, despite everything, he never shoots from this gun. Against Akutagawa and the organization leader, foes set on killing him, he only ever uses the wire gun. When threatening Dazai, he uses a gun made by his own skill that would not work on Dazai, something Asagiri never dared write again. And when standing at gunpoint against Sasaki, he just screams and doesn't even try to fight. And with that, it is unfortunately time to address the elephant in the room. The nearly naked, soaking wet elephant in the room. So I know I haven't talked about the Azure King's escalation. I promise we are getting. So Sasaki is a weird character, one kind of tailor-made to be a villain of the first light novel. All signs point to her leading the culprit, largely for the reason that outside of the 4 ability users, there really aren't that many major characters in the story. It feels more predictable and more out of nowhere as she has much less screen time. Page time? She appears much less in the light novel than in the anime, as there are no additional scenes in the novel where she is included. This means that between the visit to the embassy and the graveyard scene, she is just completely gone. But still, given that this is a mystery novel and the villain organization has an even lesser presence, we have no reason to believe that it's anyone other than her or Rokuzo. The fake out where we believe Rokuzo is the culprit is at least much more effective in the light novel with only one entrance to the room, as opposed to the layout that it has in the anime, which is just screaming that a second reveal is coming. But overall, I would say I give a lot more credit to Sasaki as a villain in the light novel than I do in the anime. However, I have to give Asagiri negative points for making me feel like I'm reading a certain other Japanese author whenever she is in the scene. Like, okay, I know that a factor of it is the fact that the book is written from Kunekida's perspective and Kunekida is obviously attracted to her. But like, come on, man. We need him to comment on how her wet clothes outline an alluring figure. Did we need him to turn away from seeing the water on her hair dripping down on her chest? Did we need him to notice her delicate lips after she shoots Rokuzo? So this, anticlimactically, brings us to the final scene. Kind of. I kind of skipped over the graveyard scene where Sasaki is donning a kimono and Sasaki and Kunekida are there to visit the gassing victim, but those are the only differences. But the final scene is what matters here. The gist is about the same. Dazai discovers who the mastermind is, Rokuzo came out of curiosity, Sasaki shoots him, unraveling ensues. But everything that is said after Rokuzo is shot is so different. And most of it is just what Sasaki says, of course. Instead of just saying that Kunekida is alike to the Azure King and then accepting death, she has reasons to get out of this alive and says so much more. She lets us actually hear what led to the Azure King going down the extremely rare route of becoming a government official and then a criminal, and it is not that surprising. He hated the injustice of the world, then tried to change it from the inside, and then hated the fact that changing it from the inside is basically impossible. But he didn't just turn to terrorism, he was convinced into it by Sasaki. It is unclear how much he was actually involved and how much is just Sasaki blaming herself for the Azure King's death, but she says that after he tried to take his own life, she was the one that suggested him to turn to terrorism, and that he wasn't easily convinced. Hearing that final part, the fact that he held on to his ideals even when they betrayed him, the fact that he relented in not turning to violence, the fact that he needed an outside force to turn him, kind of sounds like the ways that Kunekida's spirit got crushed throughout the series. And he cannot deny it either. He has meaningful internal monologue about how, despite the fact that he was following his ideals and rising through adversity, people still died around him. The same resentment that drove the Azure King to do what he did is building up inside of him. Even if I think the symbolism of the spider lilies that is used is slightly overplayed, it still works well to show that despite the fact that Kunekida is looking away from the lives that are lost, they are lost nonetheless. And so that's it. The first Bungo Stray Dogs light novel is great, and all the issues from the Azure Messenger come from the changes that were made. It is great, right? So, while the light novel is much better than the anime arc, and does do a lot more to explore Kunekida's character, I can't really say it is good. While reading it, I kept having so many issues with it, mostly stemming from the fact that it is Asagiri's first time writing a novel that we know of. There's a possibility that there are other novels that he wrote that were published under a different pen name, or ones not published at all. I already pointed out the way that Sasaki was written, but it is not my only complaint about the writing, not by a long shot. Now, I'm by no means an action reader, I'll admit that much. The most action-packed scene from a book I read this year was the shootout in The Great Gatsby, so I won't comment on whether that part is good or not, as I do not have a frame of reference. But the other parts definitely had their highs and lows, alright. For every heart-wrenching scene of Kunekida fighting off Dazai to get closer to a deadly gas, we get a pilot saying, "You mean those detectives that let the missing people get killed?" Which may as well be the only sign of the detective agency's reputation worsening in this entire book. For every well-built-up fake-out where we're led to believe that Dazai is typing an email to the agency when he is actually tracking it, we get a scene of Dazai saying, "I've lived a life of much shame," as a forced and nonsensical reference. For every improvement made in the graveyard scene where Kunekida admits weakness in not being able to comfort those around him, we get a nonsensical deathbed confession from Sasaki whose exclusion may as well be the best thing the anime has ever done. And so, as much as I would love to say that the novel is great, all I can say is that it is fine. Cathartic experience for a certified hater of the Azure Messenger arc like myself, for sure, but past the catharsis, all I'm left with is a book that is so clearly written by a manga author trying to describe manga panels to the reader. There is so much description and dialogue, scenes that felt like they were written to be turned into a manga panel but were instead just left like they are. It is nothing out of the ordinary for a light novel. The word light is in there for a reason, but I still find very few reasons to read this light novel past Kunekita's narration, which is, as stated before, very hit or miss. And as I have not stated before, more rare than you would expect, with there only really being two scenes, those being the abandoned hospital scene and the graveyard scene, where it feels like Kunekita's internal dialogue being internal, as opposed to just being something he says out loud, actually matters. It isn't like internal monologue is always kept internal in manga and anime, Bungo Stray Dogs included, meaning that the entire reason to read this 180-page novel is only highlighted in two scenes, and I think that is the best recommendation that I can give to a non-Bungo fan. Though for Bungo fans, it makes the actual ending of the arc, the most important part of it, fully formed in a way that makes the central character reflect on themselves, as well as making the reader reflect on what they think they know about the character, serving as a beautiful finale to a flashback arc that gives us more insight into a character that was, up until this point, meant to be an untouchable and single-sided figure. Something Asagiri never dared write again. You thought I'd be done with this series in two parts, you thought wrong. Remember, no thinking. The second volume of the Bungo Stray Dogs light novel is Dazeo Somewhere in the Dark Era, covering the flashback arc of the second season of the anime. And in contrast to the Azure Messenger arc, which I would consider to be the worst arc of the Bungo Stray Dogs anime, I would consider this to be the best one, and I know it's no unpopular opinion. And I am deathly curious about whether the light novel elevates it or not, because if it manages to make this already amazing arc even better, then this might just be a novel worth recommending even to non-Bungo fans. So if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on the Dark Era arc as well as the second Bungo Stray Dogs light novel, well then you're in luck, because I'm kind of known for posting my thoughts online every month or so, when I upload on time. It won't be my next video because I have some other things that I've been cooking up for about a year now, but I am planning on finishing it by the end of the year for sure. And until then, bye bye!
していた